When I first unlocked the cabin that had been in my family for 3 generations, I expected peace, not trouble. But the moment Karen's teenage son spotted me on the porch, the whole place erupted like a storm. He sprinted back home yelling that a stranger had broken in. Minutes later, Karen herself came marching up the dirt path, phone pressed to her ear, screaming into 911 that a dangerous man was trespassing in her neighborhood. By the time the sheriff's cruiser pulled into the driveway, half the neighbors were peeking out their windows, waiting for me to be dragged away. But what happened next silenced them all. The officer stepped out, took one look at me, then stiffened, heels clicking. His hand shot up in a salute, and his words cut through the stunned silence. "Yes, Major General." Karen's smirk instantly crumbled into shock. The gravel road crunched beneath my tires as I drove up the winding path toward the cabin. It had been years since I last set foot here. Military service had a way of pulling me from one continent to another, never leaving me with enough time to rest, let alone return to the one place that truly felt like home. The cabin had been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather built it with his bare hands back when the land was wild and untamed, and my father kept it alive with repairs and additions over the years. For me, it wasn't just a cabinet, it was a piece of history, a reminder of where I came from, and a symbol of everything my family stood for. As the truck climbed the last stretch of road, trees arched overhead, their branches thick and green with summer. The sun slipped through them in golden shafts, casting flickering patterns on the windshield. I rolled down the window, inhaling the pine and earth, and for the first time in months, I felt my shoulders loosen. No distant radio calls, no urgent commands. Just quiet. But quiet doesn't always mean peace. When I pulled up in front of the cabin, I saw the changes immediately. The old wooden fence was still standing, weathered but strong, yet something about the air felt different. Across the gravel road, newer houses dotted the hillside, places that hadn't been there when I was a boy. Modern siding, glass porches, and neatly trimmed lawns stood in sharp contrast to the rough-hewn timbers of my family cabin. Those houses were Karen's world, the new world, the HOA-driven development that had popped up over the past decade. My cabin, on the other hand, stood like a stubborn reminder that the land had a history long before they arrived. I stepped out of the truck, boots hitting the ground, and paused. The cabin looked almost exactly as I remembered. The red door faded. With time, the flagpole by the porch leaning a little, the rocking chair still swaying gently as if waiting for someone to sit. A flood of memories came back. Summers spent fishing with my grandfather, nights by the fire with my father telling stories of his youth, mornings where the world seemed endless. I ran a hand over the railing and felt the grooves where my grandfather had carved initials decades ago. I carried my duffel bag inside, where the smell of cedar greeted me like an old friend. Dust lay thick on the furniture, but the bones of the place were solid. The cabin had been waiting for me, patient as ever. I lit a fire in the old stone hearth and sat for a while, staring at the flames, letting the silence wrap around me. Out there, beyond the walls, life had changed. But inside these walls, it felt like nothing ever had. The peace didn't last long. The first sign of trouble came later that afternoon. I was out by the woodpile, splitting logs to stack for the week. Ahead, when I heard footsteps crunching on the gravel path, I turned, axe still in hand, and saw a boy standing just beyond the fence line. He couldn't have been more than 15 or 16, skinny with a mop of messy hair. He froze when he saw me, eyes wide like a deer caught in headlights. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my tone calm, even friendly. The boy didn't answer. Instead, he took a sharp step back, then spun around and bolted down the path toward the row of houses. His sneakers pounded against the dirt, fading into the distance. I watched him go, confused. I hadn't done anything to scare him, at least, not intentionally. Maybe it was the axe in my hands, or maybe it was the uniform jacket still draped over the porch rail, the one I hadn't bothered to pack away yet. I shook my head and went back to splitting wood, but unease lingered. Kids didn't usually react that way to strangers in this part of the world. Folks around here used to wave, say hello, maybe even stop to talk. Things were different now, though. These new houses weren't built by people who cared about community. They were built by people who cared about rules. Rules about fences, about lawns, about what color you could paint your mailbox. Rules written by people like Karen. I had heard her name even before I returned. Neighbors mentioned it in passing, almost like a warning. "Watch out for Karen," they'd say, shaking their heads. She was the self-appointed queen of the HOA, the kind of woman who believed the whole neighborhood revolved around her, and though I hadn't met her face-to-face yet, I already knew enough. People like her didn't like people like me. People who didn't bow to her rules. People who owned land she couldn't control. The boy must have been her son. That much seemed obvious when, not 15 minutes later, I heard raised voices echoing from down the path. I glanced up just in time to see her marching toward me, phone clutched in her hand, her son trailing behind. She was tall, sharp-featured, with a look on her face that could cut glass. Even from a distance, I could see the fury in her eyes. "You there?" she shouted before she was even close. "What do you think you're doing here?" I set the axe down and wiped my hands on my jeans. "I'm on my property," I replied evenly. This cabin belongs to me. Property, she scoffed, her voice dripping with disdain. This land is part of our community now. We don't allow strangers wandering around and squatting in homes that don't belong to them. Her words stung not because they were true, but because of the arrogance with which she spoke them. She had no idea who I was, no idea what this cabin meant, yet she stood there as if she had the authority to erase my history with a single sentence. This cabin has been in my family for over 60 years, I said firmly. It was passed down to me. You don't have a say in that. Karen's face twisted into a smirk. She tapped at her phone screen with sharp, deliberate movements. We'll see about that. My son said he saw a strange man with an axe lurking around, and I'm calling the police right now. You're trespassing, and you're threatening our safety. Her words carried loudly down the road, loud enough for other neighbors to hear. I noticed curtains twitching, faces peeking out from behind glass. It was as if she had summoned an audience eager to watch whatever spectacle she intended to create. You're making a mistake, I said. But she ignored me. The boy tugged at her arm nervously. Mom, may be quiet, she snapped. Go back to the house. He hesitated, then turned and walked quickly away, leaving her alone with her performance. She pressed the phone to her ear and began speaking into it with exaggerated urgency, describing me as if I were some dangerous criminal, a stranger, an intruder, a man with a weapon, lurking near homes. I stood there, jaw clenched, as her voice rang out. This was exactly what I had hoped to avoid: drama, accusations, the prying eyes of neighbors. I had come here for peace, but instead I was being painted as a threat in my own home. The sound of sirens was faint at first, then grew louder, winding up the road. A sheriff's cruiser appeared through the trees, tires spitting gravel as it pulled up beside Karen. She stepped back triumphantly, folding her arms, her expression one of smug satisfaction. The crowd of neighbors grew thicker now, spilling onto porches and lawns, whispering, pointing. They were waiting to see me hauled off, waiting for the story to confirm their fears. The dangerous stranger, the man who didn't belong. I took a breath, steadying myself. I'd faced worse in deserts and mountains half a world away, but never had I expected to face such hostility on the soil that should have been safest of all my own. The cruiser door opened. A uniformed officer stepped out, adjusting his hat against the sun. His eyes swept the scene, moving from Karen's furious face to my steady stance by the woodpile. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, and then, recognition flickered in his gaze. His posture straightened instantly, his hand rising to his brow in a sharp salute. His voice rang clear, carrying over the hushed crowd. Double quotes. Yes, Major General. The words cut through the air like a blade, and silence fell heavy over the road. Karen's smirk faltered, her lips parting in shock. The neighbors stared, eyes wide, as if the ground had shifted beneath them. I stood there, quiet, letting the weight of the moment sink in. The cabin was mine, the land was mine, and no one, not even Karen, was going to take that away. The silence that followed the sheriff's salute felt almost unreal. 1 second, Karen was glowing with self-righteous triumph, her arms folded as if she had already won. The next, her expression cracked like glass under pressure, her mouth falling, open eyes darting from me to the officer and back again. The crowd of neighbors, who had been whispering and muttering only moments before, now stood frozen, their curiosity giving way to confusion. I didn't move right away. Years of command had trained me to read a situation, to wait, to let silence settle before speaking. The sheriff's salute hung in the air, sharp and deliberate, not just a gesture of respect but of recognition. His voice had carried with the kind of certainty that left no room for doubt. And in that certainty, every accusation Karen had thrown at me crumbled. Major General, Karen repeated softly, as though testing the words on her tongue. The disbelief in her tone was almost pitiful. What are you talking about? The sheriff dropped his hand slowly, his face hardening into the professional mask I'd seen countless times in the military. He turned to Karen, his tone clipped and cold. Ma'am, you've made a very serious mistake. Karen blinked, her bravado faltering. Mistake? He's a stranger. He's trespassing on community property. He's this man, the sheriff interrupted firmly, is not a stranger. He is Major General Jonathan Rains, United States Army, retired. And this cabin you claim doesn't belong to him has been his family's property for longer than this development has even existed. The murmurs among the neighbors began immediately, low at first, then louder as they passed the information between one another like wildfire. I caught fragments of their whispers. Major General, Army, his family's land. Faces turned, eyes wide, and the same people who had been waiting to see me in handcuffs now looked ashamed, uneasy, even guilty. Karen's face flushed red, her jaw tightening as she tried to claw her way back into control. That can't be right. This land is part of the HOA. All property must follow regulations. That cabin doesn't even enough. The sheriff snapped, his patience gone. You filed a false police report, ma'am. You described this man as a dangerous intruder. You said he was threatening your safety. Do you have any idea what that kind of accusation means? You wasted law enforcement resources and attempted to slander a decorated officer in his own home. The words hit Karen like a physical blow. For a moment, she faltered, her eyes darting toward the crowd, searching for support, but none came. The neighbors who had once fed her authority with their silence now avoided her gaze. Some shook their heads, others crossed their arms, their loyalty crumbling under the weight of the truth. I stayed quiet, letting the sheriff speak for me. I had nothing to prove to Karen or her audience. My uniform jacket still hung on the porch rail, the patches and insignia plain for anyone to see. My silence wasn't weakness, it was authority. Authority she couldn't touch. Karen tried again, her voice higher now, desperate. I was only trying to protect the neighborhood. My son was scared. He said there was a strange man with an axe. Was I supposed to think? The sheriff turned slowly toward her son, who stood off to the side, shifting uncomfortably. Son, did you see this man do anything threatening? Did he harm you? The boy hesitated, glancing at me, then at his mother. His voice was quiet, almost guilty. No, he was just chopping wood. A ripple went through the crowd, and Karen's composure cracked further. But the axe chopping wood with an axe is not a crime, the sheriff cut in, his tone sharp as steel. You should have asked before assuming the worst. You don't get to rewrite property lines, or invent laws that don't exist. Karen's lips trembled, but no words came. For the first time, I saw something beyond arrogance in her eyes. Fear. Not fear of me, but fear of what this meant. Fear that her control, the grip she held over this neighborhood, was slipping away in front of everyone. The sheriff turned back to me, his tone softening. Sir, my apologies for this disturbance. I assure you, we'll be filing a report on this incident. If this kind of harassment continues, charges can and will be pressed. I gave a curt nod. Thank you, Sheriff. My voice was calm, but inside, my blood ran hot. Years of discipline kept me collected, but I couldn't ignore the insult. To be treated like an intruder on my own land by someone who had no claim, no history, no respect for the truth. It was a wound deeper than words could show. Karen finally broke the silence, her voice shrill. You can't talk to me like this. I'm on the HOA board. We make the rules around here. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. You don't make rules that override state law or property deeds, ma'am, and you certainly don't call 911 to weaponize law enforcement against your neighbors. Consider this your warning. The murmurs grew louder now, neighbors no longer whispering but speaking openly. I told you that cabin was his family's. She's gone too far this time. Imagine calling the cops on a major general. The weight of their voices pressed in, and Karen's face twisted with rage and humiliation. Her son tugged at her sleeve again, whispering something I couldn't hear, but she yanked her arm away and spun on her heel. Without another word, she marched back down the path, her son stumbling to keep up. The sheriff lingered a moment, making sure the crowd dispersed. When he finally stepped closer, his voice dropped so only I could hear. You handled that well, sir. I've dealt with her before. She thrives on control, but after this, I think you've shaken her grip. I looked past him, toward the retreating figure of Karen disappearing into the line of houses. She'll be back, I said quietly. People like her don't stop. They just change tactics. The sheriff's jaw tightened. Then she'll find the law is not on her side. You've got my respect, sir, and my support. He saluted once more, then climbed into his cruiser and drove away, leaving me alone again with the cabin and the settling quiet. But it wasn't the same quiet as before. The neighbors who had watched the drama unfold carried what they'd seen back to their homes. Word would spread quickly about Karen's humiliation, about my identity, about the sheriff's salute. By nightfall, the story would ripple through every household in the development. Some would whisper with awe, others with unease. But one thing was certain. The narrative had shifted. I was no longer the stranger. I was the Major General. Yet as I sat on the porch that evening, staring out at the lake shimmering under the last light of the day, I knew Karen wouldn't let it rest. Humiliation cuts deep in people like her. She had lost face in front of everyone she sought to control. And when people like Karen lose face, they don't surrender. They scheme. I leaned back in the old rocking chair, the wood creaking beneath me, and closed my eyes. My instincts, honed by years of command and survival, told me the battle had only just begun. And in the distance beyond the trees, I heard the faint sound of voices carried on the breeze, neighbors talking, whispering, choosing sides. The war for the cabin had started. The morning after the incident with the sheriff dawned cool and quiet. Mist curled over the lake, and the cabin seemed to breathe with a kind of timeless calm. I brewed a pot of coffee on the old stove, the scent filling the air, and carried a mug out to the porch. The rocking chair creaked as I settled in, watching the first rays of sunlight cut through the trees. For a moment, it was almost possible to believe yesterday's chaos had been nothing but a bad dream. But peace never lasts long when someone like Karen is nearby. The silence was soon broken by the distant sound of voices, sharp and raised. At first, I thought it was just neighbors arguing, but then I realized it was deliberate a meeting. My ears caught bits and pieces carried on the morning air. Rules, violations, safety concerns. Karen's voice rose above the rest, strident and commanding. She wasn't hiding in humiliation. She was rallying. I sighed, sipping my coffee. I had been right the night before. She wasn't going to give up. Yesterday, she had tried to use fear and the law to push me out. Today, she would turn to rules, papers, and the HOA's grip on the neighborhood. By noon, the first sign of her counterattack arrived. A neatly folded envelope was taped to the front door of my cabin, sealed with the HOA's crest. The language inside was polished but sharp, written to sound official. Notice of violation. It listed several supposed infractions: unauthorized structure not in compliance with HOA standards, failure to maintain lawn in accordance with community regulations, display of unapproved signage and flags, unauthorized use of outdoor equipment, axe, woodcutting, creating safety hazards. At the bottom, bolded in all caps, it read, failure to comply will result in fines, penalties, and potential legal action, up to and including forced removal from premises. I read it twice, then set it down on the table. Forced removal. The words were laughable, if not so predictable. The cabin didn't belong to the HOA, it belonged to me. Long before Karen or her rules had ever touched this land, this cabin stood here, yet she had the audacity to act as though her board had authority over my grandfather's work. Later that day, as I stacked firewood, 2 men in polo shirts and clipboards approached. They introduced themselves as compliance officers for the HOA. Neither looked comfortable, but both carried the weight of bureaucracy in their clipboards. Sir, one of them began carefully, we've had reports of multiple violations. We'll need to conduct an inspection. I leaned on the axe handle and met his gaze. Inspection? For what? This cabin isn't part of your association. It never has been. The other man shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Carlson, Karen, I said flatly. Yes, Mrs. Carlson stated that all properties along this road fall under HOA jurisdiction. We're just here to do me a favor, I interrupted. Before you waste my time, go down to the county records office. Ask them who owns this cabin and this land. My grandfather built it before your association existed. You don't have jurisdiction here, and you never will. The first man swallowed hard, clearly caught between duty and doubt. The second looked relieved at the excuse to leave. We'll check the records, he muttered, and they walked off, leaving me with the faint satisfaction that Karen's empire wasn't as airtight as she believed. But I knew better than to underestimate her persistence. That evening, as the sun set, a knock came at the door. This time, it wasn't the sheriff or HOA men. It was an older couple from down the road, Mr. and Mrs. Hendricks. I remembered them from my childhood. They had lived here long before Karen moved in. We heard what happened yesterday, Mrs. Hendricks said softly, her hands wringing nervously. And today, she's stirring everyone up again, passing around flyers, talking about how dangerous it is to have you here. Dangerous? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Mr. Hendricks nodded grimly. She's saying you're unstable, that you brought weapons back from the war, that the cabin is a hazard to the neighborhood. She's scaring the younger families into thinking you're some kind of threat. I clenched my jaw. It wasn't enough for her to attack my property. She was attacking my character, my reputation. In the military, I had learned that when someone can't defeat you with force, they try to poison the air around you. Lies, whispers, rumors, those were weapons too. She won't stop, Mrs. Hendricks whispered, but not everyone believes her. Some of us remember your family. We know this cabin is yours. If you need signatures, witnesses, whatever you need, will help. Their support meant more than they knew. I thanked them, shook Mr. Hendricks' hand, and watched them disappear into the fading light. That night, I sat by the fire, staring into the flames. Karen had drawn her first real weapon, the HOA. She had the board, the rules, the fear of families who didn't know any better, but I had something she didn't, the truth. And truth, I reminded myself, always finds a way to shine through lies. The next morning, Karen escalated again. I awoke to the sound of machinery. Looking out the window, I saw a crew unloading equipment at the edge of my property. Bright yellow stakes, orange spray paint, measuring tape. I stepped outside, boots crunching against the gravel. What do you think you're doing? I asked. One of the workers, a young man with a hard hat, looked up nervously. We've been contracted to survey this land for community improvement projects. New walking trails. This isn't community land, I said sharply. It's private property. He shifted uncomfortably. We were told it was part of the HOA. I didn't need to ask who had told him. Pack it up, I ordered. You don't set foot past that fence, not unless you want to be charged with trespassing. The man hesitated, then gave a small nod and signaled his crew. Within minutes, they were gone, their truck rumbling back down the road. Karen appeared, moments later, her heels clicking angrily on the gravel. You can't interfere with community projects? She snapped. I crossed my arms. Try me. This is my land. Karen, your HOA doesn't own it, doesn't regulate it, and never will. You keep crossing lines you don't understand. Her face twisted into something between rage and desperation. We'll see about that. You think your title makes you untouchable? You think one salute from a small-town sheriff means you can just do whatever you want? I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. No, what makes me untouchable is the deed with my name on it. The law doesn't bend to your ego, and you should remember what happened yesterday, because next time, the law might not be so forgiving. Her eyes flickered, fear mixing with fury, but she didn't back down. She spun on her heel and stormed away, her words trailing behind her like poison. This isn't over, and I knew she was right. The rest of the day passed in tense silence. The neighbors avoided eye contact when they drove past. Some waved awkwardly, others pretended not to see me. Word of Karen's lies was spreading, and though not everyone believed her, enough did to create an invisible wall between me and the community. That night, as I sat once again by the fire, the flames reflecting off the cabin's old walls, I realized something important. This wasn't just about land or property anymore. Karen wasn't simply trying to claim control, she was trying to erase me, to make me a ghost in the place that had always been mine, and that was a battle I could not, and would not, lose. The cabin stood firm around me, its timbers creaking with the weight of history. My grandfather's hands had built these walls. My father's sweat had preserved them. My own years away had never severed the bond. This cabin wasn't just wood and stone, it was blood, legacy, and memory. Karen thought she could paper over that with HOA letters and threats. She thought she could drown out truth with gossip and fear. But she underestimated the strength of something she couldn't control. Heritage. As I banked the fire for the night, I whispered to myself, almost like a vow, she wants a war, she'll get one. And outside, under the cover of darkness, the neighborhood seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next move in a battle that was only just beginning. The following week began with an eerie quiet, the kind that comes before a storm. For a few days, no one came up the gravel road. No HOA men with clipboards, no surveyors, not even Karen storming up in her heels. The neighbors still glanced at me cautiously when they passed, but there were fewer whispers, fewer eyes peeking through curtains. It would have been tempting to believe that, maybe, just maybe, she had accepted defeat, but I knew better. Karen wasn't the kind of woman who gave up. She was the kind who licked her wounds in silence, then came back, sharper and louder than before. And sure enough, on the 5th morning, the storm broke. It began with another envelope on my door. But this one wasn't from the HOA. The letterhead was from a law firm in the city, bold and imposing, the kind of stationery meant to intimidate. I tore it open and scanned the pages. Cease and desist notice. The letter accused me of occupying illegally held property, claiming that my cabin fell under HOA ownership due to a revised land charter filed with the county. It demanded that I vacate within 30 days or face civil litigation. I sat down heavily at the kitchen table, the letter crumpled in my hands. A revised land charter. That was impossible. My grandfather's deed was ironclad, but Karen was smart enough to know most people wouldn't question legal jargon. She didn't need the law to be on her side, she just needed the illusion of law to frighten me into leaving. Later that afternoon, a county inspector arrived. His truck pulled into the driveway, dust billowing behind him. A middle-aged man stepped out, clipboard in hand, his eyes flicking from the cabin to me. Afternoon, he said, clearing his throat. We've received complaints about this property. Structural hazards, possible code violations. I raised an eyebrow. Complaints from who? He hesitated. Anonymous. But we're required to follow up. I almost laughed. Anonymous. That word might as well have been signed, Karen. Go ahead, I said, stepping aside. Take a look. You'll find this place is solid. For the next hour, he poked and prodded, checking the foundation, the chimney, even the septic system. I followed him, answering his questions calmly, pointing out repairs I'd personally overseen. Finally, he set his clipboard down with a sigh. Looks fine to me. Better shape than half the houses in the county, frankly. Then I assume this is the last time I'll see you, I asked. He gave me a sympathetic look. Honestly, probably not. If someone's determined to make your life difficult, they'll keep filing complaints. My advice? Keep your paperwork in order. You're clearly a man who knows how to handle himself, but bureaucracy doesn't fight fair. As he drove away, frustration boiled in my chest. Karen was trying to wear me down, not with direct confrontation but with endless harassment letters, inspections, threats. She was betting that eventually the weight of it would make me fold. That evening, I walked down to the lake, the water reflecting the fading sky in hues of orange and gold. I needed the calm, needed to remind myself why this battle mattered. The cabin wasn't just for walls and a roof, it was my family's legacy, a piece of history that no board or lawyer could erase. And as long as I had breath in my body, I wouldn't let Karen steal it. The next day, the battlefront shifted again. I returned from chopping wood to find 3 SUVs parked near the edge of my property. A small crowd had gathered, neighbors, board members, and Karen herself, standing at the center like a queen on her throne. Beside her was a man in a tailored suit, briefcase in hand. He looked out of place in the dust and gravel, but his posture screamed authority. I walked down the path, my boots steady on the ground. What's this? I asked. Karen's smirk returned, sharper than ever. This is Mr. Halvorsen, our legal counsel. He's here to explain to you, once and for all, that your little cabin doesn't belong to you. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. Sir, based on the documents filed with the county, the land on which this structure sits was absorbed into the Homeowners Association jurisdiction 10 years ago. By continuing to occupy it, you are in violation of association bylaws and subject to removal. I stared at him, then at the gathered neighbors. Some looked uncertain, others smug, feeding on Karen's confidence. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a folder I had been keeping close since the day I arrived. Inside was the original deed, notarized and recorded decades ago, along with tax records in my name. I held it up for all to see. "This is the law," I said, my voice steady. "Signed, sealed, and older than your entire subdivision. My family built this cabin, and I've paid every tax on it since the day it was passed down to me. No charter, no bylaw, no HOA vote can erase that." The lawyer reached for the papers, but I pulled them back. "You'll get a copy when a judge asks for it. Until then, you don't lay a finger on it." Karen's face burned red, her composure slipping. "Don't listen to him," she barked at the neighbors. "He's lying. That deed is forged. He's just trying to intimidate us with his military background. He doesn't belong here." But her words didn't carry the same weight as before. The sheriff's salute still lingered in the minds of the neighbors, and the sight of my paperwork, tangible, undeniable, planted seeds of doubt. Mr. Helverson cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "We'll need to review these claims. If you'll provide copies, we can. You'll get them when I'm ready," I said again, "and not before." The lawyer nodded stiffly, gathering his briefcase. "Very well, but understand, this isn't finished." Karen's eyes blazed with fury, but the crowd was already dispersing. Without the full weight of legal authority on her side, her performance had lost its shine. Neighbors walked away whispering, some shaking their heads, others giving me small nods of quiet respect. When the SUVs finally rolled off, the dust they left behind felt like the settling of another battle. But I knew it wasn't the end. Karen wasn't beaten, not yet. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the porch with a lantern burning low, staring into the dark. My instincts buzzed with the sense of something building, something bigger than HOA, letters, or county inspectors. Karen had tasted humiliation twice now, and each time she came back louder. Next time, she'd come back dangerous. I thought about the sheriff, about his salute, about the words he had said. "You've got my support." I might need it sooner than I wanted to admit. As the night stretched on, the forest was silent, but my mind was not. The war for the cabin had grown beyond a dispute over land. It was about control, about pride, about a woman who couldn't stand to lose, and a man who refused to yield. And as the lantern flickered low, I made myself a promise. Whatever Karen brought next, I would be ready, because I had fought battles across oceans, commanded men in deserts and mountains, faced enemies far more dangerous than an angry HOA queen. And every time, I had come out standing. This battle would be no different. The silence after the sheriff's salute lingered long in the air, heavy and unforgettable. Karen's face had gone from fiery red to ghostly pale, and her son tugged at her sleeve, urging her to leave before the scene grew any worse. But pride is a dangerous thing. Karen tried to blurt excuses, mumbling about community safety and suspicious behavior. But no one bought her story anymore. The neighbors, once eager spectators, now looked away in shame or curiosity, whispering to one another about what they had just witnessed. For the first time since I'd returned to the cabin, I felt the balance shift. The burden wasn't on me to defend my presence anymore. It was on Karen to justify her lies. When the sheriff left, his parting words were clear. "Major General, this land is yours. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. If this woman gives you trouble again, you call me directly." His cruiser rolled down the dirt road, leaving a cloud of dust that drifted slowly between the pines. Karen stood in it for a moment, defeated, before pulling her son home. I stayed on the porch, breathing deeply, letting the weight of years of service and the fight for peace settle into something calmer. But I knew it wasn't over. People like Karen didn't surrender quietly. The following morning, the woods were still and damp with dew. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat on the porch steps, watching the sunlight break through the branches. It should have been perfect, just me, the cabin, and the birdsong, but I couldn't shake the memory of Karen's twisted smirk when she first saw the sheriff arrive. That smirk was gone now. But what if she tried again? What if she rallied more neighbors to her cause? My instincts, sharpened over decades of military life, told me to prepare, not for war, but for defense of what was mine, defense of the truth. As the days rolled on, I noticed a shift in the community. Some neighbors avoided me, embarrassed by how quickly they had judged. Others came quietly, knocking on the cabin door with pies, baked bread, or just words of apology. One old man, Harold, admitted he had always wondered about the cabin but assumed it was abandoned. "You keep it like your grandfather did," he said softly, "and I respect that." His words warmed me more than he realized. They reminded me that not everyone followed Karen's lead. Some still knew the value of history, of respect. Karen, however, didn't stop. She began walking her son past the cabin more often, pointing and whispering loud enough for me to hear. "That man doesn't belong here. He's dangerous." Just wait. I ignored it at first, focusing instead on restoring the cabin. I fixed the roof shingles, repaired the porch railings, and even painted the front door the same deep green it had been when my grandfather built it. Every stroke of the brush was a declaration. I am here, this is mine, and I won't be moved. But Karen escalated. She filed complaints with the county, claiming the cabin was a safety hazard. Inspectors came, checked everything, and left shaking their heads, telling me my property was in perfect order. She rallied a handful of neighbors to sign a petition, demanding better community standards. But most people refused once they heard my side of the story. One night, I caught her son sneaking around the edge of my property, probably sent to take photos. When I stepped out with a lantern, the boy bolted like a rabbit. I didn't chase him. He was just a pawn in her endless game. The breaking point came one Sunday afternoon. I was sitting inside reading when I heard shouting outside. Karen stood at the edge of my driveway with 3 men I didn't recognize. They weren't neighbors, they were hired help. Big men with arms crossed, the type meant to intimidate. Karen's voice carried as she demanded I leave her neighborhood. She claimed I was a threat, that no one felt safe with me around. The men shifted like they expected me to argue, maybe even fight. But instead, I stepped out calmly, wearing the same uniform jacket I had left folded neatly in my duffel. The sight of it silenced them for a beat. I stood tall, decades of command and discipline in my posture, and said simply, "You're trespassing on my land. Leave." The men looked at each other, then at Karen, uncertain. She hissed at them to do something, but none of them moved. Maybe it was the weight of the uniform, maybe it was the steadiness of my voice, but they backed away slowly, muttering excuses. Karen screamed after them, furious, but they wanted no part of the fight. She was left standing there alone, her face twisted in rage. I didn't shout, didn't threaten, I only looked her in the eye and said, "This ends now." Word spread fast after that. Neighbors began to see her for what she was, a woman obsessed with control, willing to lie and manipulate to get her way. Her influence crumbled. Parents whispered about not letting their kids play near her house. People avoided her at the local store. The more she tried to insist I was the problem, the more isolated she became. And me, I found peace again. Slowly, the cabin stopped feeling like a battlefield and started feeling like home. Weeks later, the sheriff came by for a friendly visit. He brought a folded American flag, saying it had flown at the county courthouse in honor of veterans. "I thought it should be here," he said, handing it to me. I thanked him and raised it on the flagpole beside the porch. The fabric caught the breeze, snapping proudly, a symbol not just of service, but of belonging. No one could ever question that again. Karen eventually retreated. Her son stopped walking by. The shouts and whispers died down. I don't know if she finally understood she had lost, or if she just grew tired of failing. But in the end, it didn't matter. The land was mine, the cabin was safe, and I had reclaimed not only my family's legacy but also my own peace of mind. On the last evening of summer, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun sink behind the pines. The lake shimmered, golden with the reflection, and for the first time in years, I felt truly still. The battles were behind me, both the ones overseas and the ones here at home. This cabin was more than wood and nails, it was memory, heritage, and strength. Karen had tried to strip it away, but in the end, she had only reminded me how much it mattered. Sometimes life has a way of testing what you're willing to stand for. And sometimes, the best answer isn't anger or revenge, it's calm, steady truth. My grandfather used to say, "A cabin in the woods can outlast any storm if its foundation is strong." That summer, I realized the same was true for people. And so, the story ended not with noise, but with quiet. The quiet of wind through the trees, of flag against the pole, of peace finally restored. The cabin stood tall, and so did I. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel, Bright Reality, for more powerful true life tales. Your support helps bring more stories of justice, resilience, and truth to life.